They thought they were harassing just another defenseless teenager at Miller's Mall in Green Hills. The Shadow Riders motorcycle gang watched as 16-year-old Sarah Connor browsed through vintage records at the small music shop, her delicate frame and gentle demeanor illuminated by the warm glow of storefront lights. They'd decided she'd be the perfect target to demonstrate their newfound authority in Jefferson County. What these hardened outlaws didn't realize was that Sarah's father wasn't just another small-town lawman. He was Michael Steel Justice Connor, the legendary sheriff of Green Hills, whose tactical brilliance had dismantled 3 major crime syndicates and whose unwavering dedication to justice had earned him the respect of every law enforcement agency in the tri-state area. The autumn evening settled over Miller's Mall like a protective shield, its warmth visible through the expansive glass windows that had witnessed 2 decades of community gatherings. Inside, the sound of contemporary pop music mixed with animated chatter, creating the familiar ambiance that had made this family-friendly establishment the social heart of Green Hills since 1999. The polished marble floors gleamed under modern LED lighting, while a carefully curated collection of local sports memorabilia and achievement plaques lined the walls, silent testaments to the town's proud heritage. Sarah Connor moved with natural confidence between music aisles, her dark hair falling in gentle waves as she flipped through vinyl records. At 16, she carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone raised to understand both privilege and responsibility, though few would guess that beneath her typical teenage exterior lay the sharp instincts inherited from generations of law enforcement service. Through the mall's broad windows, the setting sun painted the sky in deep shades of crimson and gold, its light reflecting off the chrome and steel of motorcycles that had recently appeared in the western parking lot. Michael Connor sat in his unmarked patrol vehicle across the street, his experienced hands resting casually on the steering wheel. At 45, his posture remained alert and professional, though most wouldn't suspect that behind his calm exterior was a lawman whose strategic mind had revolutionized rural law enforcement tactics. The evening's peaceful rhythm faltered as the mall's glass doors slid open, bringing with it the heavy footfalls of motorcycle boots and the crackle of leather jackets. The Shadow Riders had been moving south, establishing territory through calculated intimidation and strategic shows of force, their reputation for sophisticated criminal operations preceding them like storm clouds on the horizon. Their leader, Marcus Cypher Blackwood, entered first, his face bearing the distinctive scar from a past encounter with Chicago law enforcement. Behind him, his lieutenants Dylan Ghost Reynolds and Victor Havoc Martinez moved like practiced predators, their movements betraying years of coordinated operations. The mall's natural buzz diminished as they entered, their presence filling the space with unspoken tension. Regular shoppers shifted uncomfortably, some discreetly gathering their children closer, others pretending to be deeply absorbed in window displays. James Parker, the elderly security guard who'd watched over Miller's Mall for 15 years, reached for his radio before thinking better of it, recognizing the patches that marked these men as members of an organization whose influence had been growing across 5 states. Sarah maintained her composure, seemingly absorbed in examining a rare vinyl pressing of Pink Floyd's The Wall. Her fingers traced the album's edge with practiced care, though her peripheral vision tracked the biker's movements, applying the situational awareness her father had instilled since childhood. Cypher's measured footsteps drew closer to the music shop, his reflection visible in the store's security mirrors. "Impressive collection you've got here," Cypher spoke, his voice carrying calculated appreciation. "Real nice setup. Vintage stuff's getting harder to find these days." The words hung in the air, weighted with unspoken implications. Mall patrons watched the scene unfold with growing unease. The Martinez family, regulars at the food court, quietly gathered their shopping bags, the father positioning himself between his young sons and the newcomers. Ted Wilson, manager of the electronics store across the way, stood in his doorway, phone discreetly positioned in his hand, thumb hovering over the emergency dial button. Havoc moved closer, deliberately invading Sarah's personal space as he reached for a nearby record. "Yeah, shame how fragile these old records are. One wrong move." He let his leather-clad fingers brush against a shelf of valuable first pressings. Accidents happen all the time in places like this. Michael observed the scene through his windshield, his exterior projecting casual indifference while his tactical mind processed every detail. He'd seen this pattern before, not just in law enforcement briefings but in countless operations across 3 counties. The Shadow Riders were expanding their territory, using local businesses as leverage points for their more sophisticated criminal enterprises. Their method was evolving from the crude intimidation of traditional biker gangs into something more calculated, more insidious. The mall's security cameras continued their silent vigil, their red recording lights blinking steadily as they captured the unfolding scene. The afternoon shopping crowd had thinned considerably, those remaining moving with careful deliberation, avoiding eye contact with the leather-clad newcomers. The food court, usually bustling at this hour, had grown unusually quiet, save for the mechanical hum of drink dispensers and the distant clatter of kitchen equipment. Ghost's attention shifted to Sarah, his stance casual, but deliberately blocking her path to the store's exit. Music's a dangerous business these days. Lot of collectors getting robbed, inventory going missing. Smart shop owners know the value of protection. His hand brushed against his jacket, the movement subtle but intentional, designed to imply rather than overtly threaten. Through the mall's windows, more motorcycles pulled into the parking lot, their riders remaining mounted, engines idling in a low, threatening chorus. The Shadow Riders were making a statement, demonstrating their numbers to anyone who might consider resistance. Michael recognized the tactic from his years in tactical response, psychological intimidation designed to paralyze opposition before any physical confrontation became necessary. Karen Chen, the music shop's owner, emerged from the back room, her face tight with concern but her voice steady as she approached. She'd seen similar scenes play out in her father's store in San Francisco, had witnessed how quickly protection could destroy a small business. "Sarah, honey, maybe you should head home, it's getting late." Cypher's attention shifted to Karen, a predatory smile playing across his scarred features. "Good advice. Young girl like her shouldn't be out alone. Lots of dangerous people around these days. Never know what might happen." Sarah's voice remained steady as she carefully returned the vinyl to its place, her movements deliberate and controlled, just as she'd learned from countless dinner table discussions about maintaining composure under pressure. "Actually, I think I'll stay. My father should be here soon. He always picks me up after his shift." The words carried a weight she knew these men couldn't yet appreciate. The autumn light continued to fade outside Miller's Mall, casting long shadows through the glass atrium that stretched overhead. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed quietly, their artificial brightness creating sharp contrasts against the darkening exterior. The sound of distant traffic along Highway 43 provided a steady backdrop to the tense scene unfolding in the music shop, where time seemed to slow beneath the watching eyes of security cameras and nervous patrons. Cypher moved deeper into the store, his leather cut creaking as he examined the vintage collection display case. The fluorescent lights caught the silver threading in his patch and the mechanical precision of his movements, betraying years of calculated intimidation. Behind him, Ghost and Havoc maintained their positions, creating a triangle of control that left Sarah cornered between the jazz section and the rear wall. "Protection's pretty reasonable these days," Ghost continued, his voice carrying just enough menace to make Karen Chen step back toward her register. "Small percentage of weekly earnings. Insurance, you might say, against unfortunate incidents." His fingers traced the edge of a rare Beatles pressing, the threat implicit in his touch. Michael watched from his vehicle, noting how 2 more Shadow Riders had entered the mall, Marcus Wire Rodriguez and Keith Sledge Thompson, their patches identifying them as the gang's technical specialists. Their presence suggested this wasn't just random intimidation. The Shadow Riders were moving to establish a digital foothold in Green Hills, likely targeting the mall's payment systems and security infrastructure. The remaining shoppers moved with careful precision around the music store's entrance, parents guiding children toward exits, teenagers abandoning their usual hangout spots near the fountain. Regular customers recognized the shift in atmosphere, the way tension had replaced the usual easy comfort of their community gathering space. The Martinez family lingered near the escalators, Mr. Martinez speaking quietly into his phone while keeping his boys close. James Parker, the security guard, had positioned himself near the information desk, his hand resting near his radio while maintaining line of sight on the developing situation. His 20 years of mall security might not match the threat level of hardened criminals, but his presence represented the community's resistance to intimidation. Through the broad windows, more motorcycles arrived, their chrome gleaming in the parking lot lights that had begun to illuminate the deepening dusk. The Shadow Riders' show of force now included at least 15 bikes, their riders maintaining a visible presence while strategic members moved inside, following a pattern that Michael recognized from recent FBI briefings on organized retail crime. "Things change," Havoc rumbled, his massive frame casting a shadow across the collection of local artists Sarah had been browsing. Route 43's getting busy these days. Lots of valuable merchandise moving through small towns like this. Smart business owners understand the importance of adaptation. Karen Chen's hands trembled slightly as she straightened a display of guitar picks, but her voice remained firm. "We've been here for 12 years without any problems. The community supports us." The words carried the weight of someone who understood the true value of local connections. Sarah maintained her position, her heart racing but her exterior calm, remembering her father's lessons about controlling fear, about using it to sharpen awareness rather than allow it to paralyze. Her hand slipped casually into her jacket pocket, where her phone had already sent an automated location ping. Another of her father's precautions, one that probably seemed overprotective to her friends, but now felt like a lifeline. Wire moved toward the store's computer system, his casual inspection betraying professional interest in the point-of-sale terminal. "Nice setup you got here. Be a shame if the system crashed, lost all that inventory data. Technical problems can be so unpredictable these days." The mall's security cameras continued their silent observation, their feeds streaming directly to both local security and, though the Shadow Riders couldn't know it, to a specialized task force that Michael had established months ago in anticipation of exactly this type of organized criminal expansion. Each movement, each implied threat, was being cataloged and analyzed in real time. The evening had transformed the mall's usual warm atmosphere into something darker, more dangerous. The carefully maintained space that had hosted countless teenage hangouts, family shopping trips, and community events now felt like contested territory, its familiar comfort giving way to an underlying current of fear that the Shadow Riders had cultivated in other towns along their expansion route. "Last chance for the reasonable approach," Ghost declared, his attention shifting between Karen and Sarah. "Simple business arrangement, weekly payments, no complications. Everyone stays operational, stays healthy." The implied threat hung in the air like smoke, filling the space between vinyl records and vintage posters with unspoken malice. Michael observed each movement from his vantage point, his tactical mind processing angles, positions, and potential scenarios. The Shadow Riders had followed their usual pattern, establishing a perimeter with their bikes while their core team moved inside. But they'd made a crucial error in their intelligence gathering, one that would soon become apparent. His hand moved casually to his radio, sending a prearranged signal that would set in motion plans laid months in advance. Sarah's response was cut short by the distinct sound of boots on marble, heavy, purposeful steps approaching from the mall's eastern entrance. The Shadow Riders shifted slightly, their attention momentarily divided between their immediate targets and the new potential threat. Through the store's security mirrors, Sarah caught glimpses of familiar figures moving into position. Deputies Mason and Rodriguez, dressed in civilian clothes but moving with unmistakable law enforcement precision. The transformation in the mall's atmosphere was subtle but profound. Where moments before fear had dominated, now a new tension emerged, the quiet anticipation that preceded decisive action. The remaining shoppers, those who hadn't fled at the first sign of trouble, began moving with deliberate casualness toward the exits, following evacuation protocols that had been quietly implemented throughout the community over the past months. Cypher's expression darkened as he noticed the shift. "Something funny about this setup," he muttered to Ghost, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. The fluorescent lights caught the tension in his shoulders, the subtle change in his stance that betrayed growing unease. Through the broad windows, more vehicles had appeared in the parking lot, unmarked but positioned with tactical precision, their occupants invisible behind tinted glass. The Shadow Riders' show of force was gradually being matched by an equally impressive but far more disciplined response. "You know," Sarah spoke, her voice carrying the same steady authority she'd heard in her father's countless times before, "there's something interesting about Green Hills that you might have missed in your research." She maintained eye contact with Cypher, channeling the confidence that came from generations of law enforcement heritage. "We're not just another small town along Route 43. Karen Chen had backed away from the register, her movement deliberate, creating space for what she somehow knew was coming. The security cameras continued their silent vigil, now accompanied by the subtle red dots of tactical laser sights appearing on the walls, a message only those trained to look for them would notice. Wire's inspection of the computer system faltered as he caught sight of something through the mall's windows. The parking lot lights were systematically shutting down, section by section, a controlled blackout that seemed to isolate the Shadow Riders' bikes while leaving strategic areas illuminated. Michael's voice, when it came, carried through the mall's public address system with calm authority, the kind that came from years of managing high-stakes situations. "Attention Miller's Mall patrons. This is Sheriff Connor. Please proceed calmly to the nearest exit following the illuminated pathways. Our staff will assist you." The effect was immediate. The remaining shoppers moved with practiced efficiency, following routes that had been drilled in community safety meetings. The Martinez family, now revealed as plainclothes officers, smoothly transitioned to securing exit points. James Parker, the seemingly elderly security guard, moved with surprising agility to assist in the evacuation, his years of military experience evident in his precise movements. Cypher's face contorted with rage as realization dawned. "You set us up," he snarled at Sarah, but his usual intimidating presence was diminished by the growing awareness of how completely his team had been outmaneuvered. The music store, with its strategic location and clear sightlines, had been chosen as carefully by law enforcement as it had been by the Shadow Riders, but for very different purposes. The mall's architecture, which had seemed to work in the gang's favor by allowing them to control access points, now revealed its dual nature. The high ceilings and open spaces that had facilitated their intimidation tactics also provided perfect positioning for tactical teams. The security cameras they'd planned to exploit were part of a sophisticated surveillance system designed specifically for situations like this. "Actually," Sarah replied, her voice steady as she moved away from the vinyl collection, "you set yourselves up. Did you really think no one noticed your pattern along Route 43? The businesses you've targeted? The systems you've compromised?" She took another step back, positioning herself exactly where months of tactical planning had determined would be the safest spot in the coming moments. Michael Connor's footsteps echoed through the now nearly empty mall as he approached the music store, his casual stride masking years of tactical training and operational experience. The fluorescent lights caught the silver of his badge, carefully concealed until now beneath his civilian jacket. Behind him, the shadows seemed to come alive as members of the Tri-County Tactical Response Team moved into predetermined positions. "You know what the difference is between your intimidation tactics and real law enforcement?" Michael's voice carried clearly across the space, drawing every eye in the store. "Real law enforcement understands patience. We watch, we wait, we learn." He moved with measured precision, each step calculated to maintain optimal distance and angle. "For 3 months we've tracked your movement south, every protection racket, every compromised payment system, every intimidated business owner." Cypher's hand moved toward his jacket, but froze as red laser dots suddenly bloomed across his chest. Ghost and Havoc shifted uneasily, their experienced eyes now registering details they'd overlooked. The strategic placement of security mirrors, the slightly tinted windows that concealed tactical positions, the carefully arranged display cases that could serve as both cover and containment. Through the store's windows, the parking lot had transformed. The Shadow Riders' bikes were now surrounded by unmarked vehicles, their riders covered by unseen officers. The darkness created by the systematic blackout worked against the gang, turning their show of force into a tactical disadvantage. 6 states, Michael continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of service. 27 businesses, over $2 million in extorted funds, not counting the credit card data you've been skimming. Did you think we wouldn't notice the pattern? That we wouldn't prepare? The mall's security system, far more sophisticated than the standard surveillance setup the Shadow Riders had expected to encounter, had recorded every word, every movement, every implied threat. Karen Chen's computer system, which Wire had been so interested in compromising, had been deliberately configured as a honeypot, designed to gather evidence of their technical infiltration attempts. Green Hills isn't just another target, Sarah added, her voice carrying the pride of someone raised in a law enforcement family. It's a community that stands together. Every shop owner you thought would be an easy mark, they've been part of this operation from the beginning. The revelation hit the Shadow Riders like a physical force. The carefully planned intimidation, the strategic positioning, the show of force, all had been anticipated and countered before they'd even entered the mall. Their reputation for sophisticated criminal operations had worked against them, making their methods predictable to those who knew what to look for. James Parker, now standing with the practiced stance of a former Marine, had positioned himself to cover the store's rear exit. The Martinez family, revealed as undercover officers, had seamlessly transitioned from pretending to flee to securing critical positions. Even Ted Wilson from the electronics store had played his part, his nervous phone handling disguising the activation of additional surveillance systems. 15 cities, Michael continued, taking another measured step forward. That's how many were waiting for you to try this. Every jurisdiction along Route 43 has been coordinating, sharing intelligence, preparing. You thought you were expanding your territory, but you were really walking into a carefully coordinated trap. The autumn evening had deepened outside, the controlled darkness broken only by strategic lighting that left the Shadow Riders exposed while concealing law enforcement positions. Inside, the music store's warm atmosphere had transformed into a tactical environment where every angle, every reflection, every line of sight had been calculated and controlled. Wire's attempt to reach for his concealed weapon was met with an immediate response. The distinctive sound of multiple tactical teams moving into final position, their movements synchronized with practiced precision. The red dots dancing across the bikers' chests multiplied, leaving no doubt about the overwhelming force positioned just beyond their sight. Karen Chen moved with calm efficiency to a position behind her counter, revealing a confidence that came from months of preparation and coordination with law enforcement. The register she'd been so nervously attending earlier now clearly visible as part of an elaborate surveillance setup, every transaction and interaction recorded and monitored. You see, Michael explained, his voice maintaining its professional calm. While you were busy trying to intimidate my daughter, your associates outside were being quietly surrounded by tactical teams from 3 counties. Those bikes you brought for show? They're now key evidence in a multi-state RICO investigation. The phones you're carrying? They've been connecting to our mobile interceptors since you crossed the county line. The Shadow Riders' realization of their situation deepened as the tactical team's presence became more apparent. Through the store's various mirrors and reflective surfaces, glimpses of heavily armed officers could be seen moving with coordinated precision. The mall's architecture, which had seemed to offer the gang tactical advantages, had been transformed into a carefully crafted containment zone. Cypher's scarred face twisted with a mixture of rage and dawning comprehension. You used your own daughter as bait, he spat, trying to maintain his threatening demeanor despite the deteriorating situation. But Sarah's confident smile told a different story. Actually, she responded, moving closer to her father with practiced ease. I volunteered. Someone needed to help identify your tech specialists, monitor your communication patterns. Who better than a teenager who practically grew up in this mall? Her hand pulled out her phone, revealing a sophisticated surveillance app disguised as a standard social media interface. The mall's emergency lights activated in a predetermined sequence, creating a carefully choreographed pattern of illumination that left the Shadow Riders exposed while protecting law enforcement positions. The security cameras, far more numerous than standard mall coverage would require, continued their silent documentation of every word and movement. Your reputation preceded you, Michael continued, his tactical positioning subtle but absolute. Your shift from traditional intimidation to technological exploitation, the way you use compromised payment systems to gather data. It made you predictable to those who knew what to look for. Every business in this mall has been part of an elaborate sting operation, gathering evidence, documenting patterns. Through the windows, more tactical units became visible, their movements precise and coordinated. The Shadow Riders' show of force had been completely contained. Their attempted intimidation transformed into evidence for a federal investigation that would span multiple jurisdictions. Wire's technical expertise suddenly seemed inadequate as he realized the sophisticated nature of the trap they'd walked into. The point-of-sale systems he'd been planning to compromise had been specially modified, designed to track and document any attempted intrusion. Even the mall's Wi-Fi network had been a carefully crafted honeypot, recording every connection attempt and digital fingerprint. Green Hills isn't just another small town, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the pride of someone who understood the true meaning of community. It's a testament to what happens when law enforcement and citizens work together. Every shop owner you threatened, they've been trained, prepared, and waiting for this moment. Karen Chen moved with newfound confidence behind her counter, revealing a hidden panel that contained sophisticated surveillance equipment. Her nervous demeanor had been a carefully crafted act, concealing years of experience as a former cybersecurity specialist who had helped design the mall's enhanced security systems. James Parker, the seemingly elderly security guard, now stood with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in specialized law enforcement. His practiced movements and positioning revealed years of tactical training that had been disguised beneath a deliberately unassuming exterior. The Martinez family, their cover as innocent shoppers now abandoned, had seamlessly integrated into the tactical containment operation. Their strategic positioning around the mall's key access points demonstrated the kind of coordination that only came from months of preparation and training. "You know what's interesting about small towns?" Michael asked, his voice carrying just a hint of professional satisfaction. "Everyone knows everyone. That teenage clerk at the coffee shop, former military intelligence, the janitor who's been mopping the same spot for the last hour, FBI Cyber Division, even the elderly couple power walking every morning. They've been documenting your surveillance patterns for weeks." The autumn evening had transformed the mall's usual warm atmosphere into something else entirely, a carefully orchestrated law enforcement operation where every detail, from the positioning of trash cans to the angle of security mirrors, had been planned with tactical precision. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead revealed the true strength of a community united against criminal exploitation. "Let me tell you about coordination," Michael continued, his voice carrying the same steady authority that had guided countless successful operations. "While you were focused on intimidating small businesses along Route 43, we were building a case that spans 6 states. Every protection payment, every data breach, every threat, all documented, time-stamped, and ready for federal prosecution." The Shadow Riders' confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by the growing realization that their sophisticated criminal enterprise had been outmaneuvered by something they'd fatally underestimated: the power of a well-prepared small-town community. Through the store's windows, more tactical teams became visible, their movements revealing a level of coordination that spoke of months of preparation. "Remember Thompson's Diner in Millbrook?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "The owner's daughter you threatened last month? She's my best friend. Her father didn't pay you protection money because he was scared. He paid because we needed to document your collection patterns, track your money movements. Every transaction, every threat, all recorded." The mall's sophisticated surveillance system continued its silent documentation as Cypher and his lieutenants processed the magnitude of their situation. The cameras, disguised within architectural features and store fixtures, had been recording in high definition, capturing every nuance of their attempted intimidation for future prosecution. "Your technical expertise?" Michael gestured toward Wire, who had gone pale, realizing the implications of his earlier system probing. "We've been tracking your digital fingerprints across 3 states, every compromised payment system, every data breach. They all led back to a pattern that helped us prepare this reception. The autumn evening's darkness outside had become an ally to law enforcement, the strategic lighting creating a tactical advantage that the Shadow Riders' superior numbers could no longer overcome. Their motorcycles, symbols of intimidation just hours earlier, now stood as evidence in what would become one of the largest organized crime cases in the state's history. Green Hills wasn't your target, Sarah explained, moving with the confidence of someone who had grown up understanding law enforcement operations. It was your final exam. Every business you scoped out, every system you probed, every threat you made. It was all part of building a RICO case that will dismantle your entire organization. Karen Chen's computer system suddenly displayed multiple screens of data, transaction logs, surveillance footage, recorded conversations from previous intimidation attempts. The evidence collection had been ongoing long before the Shadow Riders had ever set foot in Green Hills, each piece carefully gathered and documented for maximum legal impact. Your reputation for sophistication? Michael continued, his tactical positioning subtly shifting to maintain optimal control of the situation. It made you predictable to those who knew what to look for. Every move you made followed a pattern we'd already documented. The only question was when you'd target Green Hills. Through the store's security mirrors, the Shadow Riders could now see additional tactical teams moving into position, their movements reflecting the kind of coordination that only came from extensive joint training. The mall's architecture, which had initially seemed to offer the gang tactical advantages, had been transformed into a carefully crafted containment zone. James Parker's radio crackled with coded updates from various positions around the mall, each transmission confirming the complete containment of the Shadow Riders' support team outside. The elderly security guard's demeanor had transformed, his movements now displaying the practiced efficiency of someone with decades of specialized law enforcement experience. You want to know about real protection? Sarah's voice carried the pride of someone who understood the true meaning of community service. Look around. Every shop owner, every employee, every regular customer. They're all part of a community that protects its own, not through intimidation, but through cooperation and preparation. The Martinez family, their cover as innocent shoppers now completely abandoned, had taken up tactical positions that demonstrated years of specialized training. Their seemingly casual placement around the mall's key access points now revealed itself as part of a carefully choreographed containment strategy. 3 months, Michael stated, his voice carrying the weight of professional satisfaction. That's how long we've been preparing for this moment. Every security camera, every computer system, every staff member, all coordinated, all prepared. While you thought you were expanding your territory, you were actually walking into the most sophisticated law enforcement operation this county has ever seen. You know what the real difference is between intimidation and law enforcement? Michael asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him respect across 3 states. Intimidation relies on fear, on making people believe they're helpless. Law enforcement, we rely on community, on people working together to protect what matters. The Shadow Riders' attempted show of force had transformed into a demonstration of their own vulnerability. Through the store's various security points, they could now see their support team being systematically detained by tactical units that had emerged from seemingly nowhere. Each arrest was being conducted with practiced precision, the result of months of joint training and preparation. That security system you were planning to compromise? Sarah gestured toward the store's surveillance setup. It was designed by former NSA specialists who retired here in Green Hills. Those cameras you thought were standard mall equipment? Military grade with facial recognition tied directly to federal databases. Every move you've made since entering the county has been documented, analyzed, and added to our case file. Cypher's scarred face betrayed a mix of rage and disbelief as he watched his carefully constructed criminal enterprise unravel. The sophisticated operation he'd built, which had successfully intimidated businesses across multiple states, had been completely outmaneuvered by what he'd dismissed as just another small-town law enforcement agency. Your digital trail? Michael continued, maintaining his tactical position while Ghost and Havoc exchanged increasingly uncertain glances. It led us to operations in 12 cities, every protection racket, every data breach, every threatened business owner. They're all connected now, all part of a federal investigation that's been building for months. The mall's emergency lighting continued its strategic illumination, creating a carefully controlled environment where every shadow, every reflection worked to law enforcement's advantage. The security cameras captured every moment from multiple angles, building an irrefutable record of the evening's events. "Remember Anderson's Electronics in Millbrook?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "The store you threatened last month? The owner's son is my classmate. Their compromised payment system? It was feeding data directly to our cybercrime unit. Every transaction, every access attempt, all documented and time-stamped." Karen Chen moved with newfound confidence behind her counter, her fingers dancing across a keyboard that revealed layer upon layer of sophisticated surveillance software. The nervous shop owner had transformed into a crucial part of an operation that would become a textbook example of community-based law enforcement. "Your reputation preceded you," Michael explained, his tactical experience evident in every measured movement. "Your shift from traditional intimidation to technological exploitation. The way you target specific businesses, compromise their systems, establish your presence. It made you predictable to those who knew what to look for. Every business in this mall has been part of an elaborate sting operation, gathering evidence, documenting patterns." Through the windows, more tactical teams became visible, their movements synchronized with years of joint training. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead revealed the true strength of a community united against criminal exploitation. "Green Hills isn't just another small town," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the pride of someone who understood the true meaning of public service. "It's a community where retired federal agents run coffee shops, where former military intelligence officers teach high school, where every business owner understands the importance of working together to protect what matters." James Parker's radio continued to relay coded updates, each transmission confirming the systematic containment of the Shadow Riders' operation. The tactical teams moved with practiced efficiency, their coordination reflecting months of preparation and training. "You know what's interesting about small towns?" Michael asked, his voice carrying just a hint of professional satisfaction. "Everyone knows everyone. That means when criminals target one business, they're not just attacking a single owner, they're threatening an entire community. And this community? We've been preparing for this moment since you first appeared on our radar." The autumn evening had transformed the mall's usual warm atmosphere into something else entirely, a carefully orchestrated law enforcement operation, where every detail, from the positioning of security cameras to the angle of store displays, had been planned with tactical precision. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead become a demonstration of community resilience and professional law enforcement at its finest. "Let me explain something about modern law enforcement," Michael continued, his voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had spent decades protecting his community. "While you were busy trying to intimidate local businesses, we were building a digital fortress. Every phone connection, every credit card transaction, every security camera feed, all feeding into a system designed specifically to track and document your operation." Cypher's attempt to maintain his intimidating presence faltered as additional tactical teams became visible through the store's windows. The Shadow Riders' show of force had been completely contained, their motorcycles now surrounded by unmarked law enforcement vehicles positioned with strategic precision. "You thought you were sophisticated," Sarah added, her voice carrying a hint of the same authoritative tone her father had perfected over years of service. "Using compromised payment systems to gather data, threatening business owners with technical failures. But every system you touched was already under surveillance. Every threat you made was being recorded and analyzed." Through the store's security mirrors, the scene continued to unfold with practiced efficiency. The Martinez family, their cover as innocent shoppers now completely abandoned, had taken up tactical positions that demonstrated years of specialized training. Their seemingly casual placement around the mall's key access points now revealed itself as part of a carefully choreographed containment strategy. "That phone in your pocket?" Michael gestured toward Wire, whose technical expertise suddenly seemed inadequate. It's been connecting to our mobile interceptors since you crossed the county line. Every call, every text, every attempt to access local networks, all documented and time-stamped for federal prosecution. The mall's sophisticated surveillance system continued its silent documentation as Karen Chen's computer displays showed multiple feeds of tactical teams systematically detaining the Shadow Riders' support personnel outside. Each arrest was being conducted with the kind of precision that only came from months of joint training and preparation. Green Hills isn't just another target on Route 43, Sarah explained, her confidence growing as she watched the operation unfold. It's a community where retired FBI cyber specialists run bookstores, where former DEA agents teach at the local high school, where every business owner understands the importance of working together to protect what matters. James Parker's radio crackled with updated positions and confirmations, each transmission reflecting a level of coordination that spoke to countless hours of preparation. The elderly security guard's demeanor had completely transformed, his movements now displaying the practiced efficiency of someone with decades of specialized law enforcement experience. "Your pattern recognition software?" Michael continued, addressing Wire directly. "The programs you use to identify vulnerable businesses? They led you straight into a trap we've been setting for months. Every system you probed, every network you tested, they were all part of an elaborate honeypot designed specifically for this moment." The autumn evening had deepened outside Miller's Mall, the strategic lighting creating shadows that worked to law enforcement's advantage. Inside, the music store's warm atmosphere had been transformed into a tactical environment where every angle, every reflection, every line of sight had been calculated and controlled. "Remember Thompson's Pharmacy last month?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The vulnerable security system you compromised? It was feeding data directly to our cyber crime unit. Every keystroke, every access attempt, all documented and time-stamped for federal prosecution. Through the store's various security points, additional tactical teams could be seen moving into final position. The Shadow Riders' attempted show of force had been completely contained, their superior numbers rendered meaningless by months of careful planning and preparation. "You want to understand real protection?" Michael's voice carried the weight of decades of law enforcement experience. "Look around. Every shop owner, every employee, every regular customer, they're all part of a community that protects its own, not through intimidation, but through cooperation and preparation." The mall's emergency lighting continued its strategic illumination, creating a carefully controlled environment where every shadow, every reflection, worked to law enforcement's advantage. The security cameras captured every moment from multiple angles, building an irrefutable record of the evening's events that would soon become part of one of the largest organized crime cases in state history. "You made 3 critical mistakes," Michael continued, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone explaining a tactical analysis. "First, you assumed small-town law enforcement meant small-town capabilities. Second, you thought your technical sophistication would overwhelm our resources. And third, most critically, you threatened my daughter thinking it would give you leverage. Instead, it gave us the perfect opportunity to spring a trap, months in the making." The Shadow Riders' realization of their complete containment deepened as additional tactical teams secured the mall's perimeter. Through the store's security feeds, multiple screens displayed federal agents documenting evidence, cyber units extracting digital records, and local law enforcement processing arrests with practiced precision. "Remember the diner in Millbrook?" Sarah asked, her confidence growing with each passing moment. "The owner's son you threatened? He's in my computer science class. That vulnerable Wi-Fi network you compromised? It was feeding data directly to our cyber unit. Every keystroke, every access attempt, all documented for federal prosecution." Karen Chen's sophisticated surveillance system continued displaying multiple feeds, each screen revealing another layer of the operation. What had appeared to be a simple point-of-sale terminal now showed itself as part of an elaborate digital trap designed specifically to attract and document criminal activity. "Your technical footprint," Michael explained, addressing Wire specifically, "led us to operations in 14 cities. every protection racket, every data breach, every threatened business owner. They're all connected now, all part of a federal investigation that's been building for months. Your digital expertise became your biggest vulnerability. Through the store's windows, the autumn evening had transformed the mall's parking lot into a coordinated law enforcement operation. The Shadow Riders' motorcycles, symbols of intimidation just hours earlier, now stood as evidence in what would become one of the largest organized crime cases in state history. Green Hills isn't just another dot on your expansion map, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she'd learned from years of watching her father work. It's a community where retired FBI cyber specialists run coffee shops, where former military intelligence officers teach high school, where every business owner understands the importance of working together to protect what matters. James Parker's radio crackled with another series of coded updates, each transmission confirming the systematic dismantling of the Shadow Riders' support network. The tactical teams moved with practiced efficiency, their coordination reflecting countless hours of joint training and preparation. You want to understand real protection? Michael's voice carried the weight of decades of law enforcement experience. Look around. Every shop owner, every employee, every regular customer, they're all part of a community that protects its own. Not through intimidation, but through cooperation and preparation. The mall's emergency lighting continued its strategic illumination, creating a carefully controlled environment where every shadow, every reflection, worked to law enforcement's advantage. The security cameras captured every moment from multiple angles, building an irrefutable record that would soon become part of a landmark prosecution. Your digital sophistication? Sarah added, gesturing toward the now useless phones in the bikers' pockets. It's been your undoing. Every call, every text, every attempt to access local networks, all documented and time-stamped. The evidence spanned 6 states, 15 cities, and dozens of victims who've been waiting for this moment. Through the store's security mirrors, additional tactical teams could be seen moving into final position. The Shadow Riders' attempted show of force had been completely contained, their superior numbers rendered meaningless by months of careful planning and preparation. Tonight isn't just about stopping your operation in Green Hills, Michael explained, his tactical positioning subtle but absolute. It's about sending a message to every criminal enterprise that thinks small towns are easy targets. We might not have the biggest budgets or the most officers, but we have something more valuable, a community that stands together, that prepares together, that protects its own. The autumn evening had deepened outside Miller's Mall, the strategic lighting creating shadows that worked to law enforcement's advantage. Inside, the music store's warm atmosphere had been transformed into a tactical environment where every angle, every line of sight, had been calculated and controlled, turning the Shadow Riders' attempt at intimidation into their final operation. In the end, Michael concluded, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had dedicated his life to protecting his community. Your sophisticated criminal enterprise was defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by something far more powerful, a community that refused to be intimidated, that chose to stand together against those who would threaten what we've built here. The Shadow Riders' final moments of freedom played out under the watchful eyes of dozens of security cameras, each recording device capturing evidence that would soon become part of a landmark federal prosecution. Through the store's windows, tactical teams continued their methodical processing of what would become one of the largest criminal enterprise busts in state history. You targeted small towns along Route 43, Sarah added, her voice steady and clear, thinking they were vulnerable, isolated, easy marks for your protection rackets and cyber crimes. Instead, you found something you didn't expect, a network of communities working together, sharing information, preparing for exactly this moment. Karen Chen's surveillance system displayed multiple feeds of the operation's final phases, each screen documenting another aspect of the Shadow Riders' complete containment. What had begun as an attempted intimidation had transformed into a textbook example of modern law enforcement coordination. Your technical expertise, Michael continued, addressing Wire one final time, it became your greatest weakness. Every system you compromised, every network you infiltrated, every piece of data you stole, They all led back to this moment. The evidence trail you've left spans 6 states, 15 cities, and dozens of businesses that have been waiting for justice. The autumn evening had settled completely over Miller's Mall, the strategic lighting creating an environment where law enforcement maintained complete tactical advantage. Inside the music store, the warm atmosphere that had witnessed countless happy memories now bore witness to the dismantling of a sophisticated criminal organization. Green Hills stands as a warning, Sarah declared, her confidence reflecting years of watching her father protect their community. To every criminal enterprise that thinks small towns are easy targets. We might not have skyscrapers or bright lights, but we have something more valuable. A community that watches out for its own, that prepares, that stands together against threats like you. James Parker's radio transmitted its final series of confirmations as the last elements of the Shadow Riders support network were secured. The tactical teams moved with practiced precision, their coordinated efforts reflecting months of preparation and joint training. You know what's truly remarkable about small-town law enforcement? Michael asked, his voice carrying just a hint of professional satisfaction. We understand patience. We know how to wait, how to watch, how to build a case that doesn't just stop a criminal operation, but dismantles it completely. Tonight isn't just an arrest. It's the end of an organization that thought it could prey on communities like ours. The mall's sophisticated surveillance system continued its silent documentation as Cypher and his lieutenants faced the reality of their situation. The cameras, disguised within architectural features and store fixtures, had recorded every moment of their failed attempt at intimidation, creating an irrefutable record for prosecution. This operation, Michael concluded, as tactical teams moved in for the final arrests, will become a template for law enforcement agencies across the country. A demonstration of what's possible when communities work together, when law enforcement adapts to modern threats, when we refuse to be intimidated by those who threaten what we've built here in Green Hills. The evening's events had transformed Miller's Mall from a simple shopping center into a symbol of community resistance against organized crime. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead become their undoing, their sophisticated criminal enterprise completely outmaneuvered by the very small-town law enforcement they had fatally underestimated. Understanding justice, Michael spoke, maintaining his tactical position as federal agents began their final approach. Isn't just about making arrests or building cases, it's about sending a message that echoes far beyond county lines. A message that small towns aren't easy targets. They're communities that stand together against threats like you. The Shadow Riders watched as their carefully constructed criminal enterprise crumbled under the weight of professional law enforcement. Through the store's security feeds, multiple screens displayed coordinated arrests taking place across 3 counties, each operation timed to coincide with the trap sprung at Miller's Mall. You know what's fascinating about digital evidence? Sarah added, her confidence growing with each passing moment. It never really disappears. Every threat you made, every system you compromised, every protection payment you collected, it's all preserved, time-stamped, and ready for federal prosecution. The same technical sophistication you relied on to intimidate businesses has become the foundation of your downfall. Karen Chen's surveillance system continued displaying multiple feeds, each screen revealing another layer of the operation's success. The payment system Wire had attempted to compromise now served as a central piece of evidence, its sophisticated tracking capabilities having documented every attempt at digital infiltration. Route 43, Michael continued, his voice carrying the weight of professional satisfaction, won't be your expansion corridor anymore. Instead, it's become a chain of evidence linking criminal operations across 6 states. Every business you threatened, every owner you tried to intimidate, they're all part of a case that will dismantle your entire organization. Through the store's windows, the autumn evening had transformed the mall's parking lot into a coordinated law enforcement operation. Additional tactical teams emerged from seemingly nowhere, their movements reflecting years of joint training and preparation that had led to this moment. Green Hills isn't just the end of your expansion, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she'd inherited from her father. It's the beginning of your organization's dismantling. While you were focused on intimidating small businesses, We were building a case that spans jurisdictions, crosses state lines, and connects dozens of seemingly isolated incidents into a pattern of organized crime. James Parker's radio crackled with confirmation after confirmation as federal agents systematically processed the scene. Each piece of evidence, from phones to patches, was being cataloged with precision that reflected months of preparation for this exact moment. Your reputation for sophistication? Michael addressed Cypher directly. It became your greatest vulnerability. The more complex your operation became, the more evidence trails you left. Every digital footprint, every financial transaction, every attempted intimidation, they all led back to this moment, to this small town you thought would be an easy target. The mall's emergency lighting continued its strategic illumination, creating a carefully controlled environment where federal agents could process evidence while maintaining complete tactical advantage. The security cameras captured every moment from multiple angles, building an irrefutable record of the operation's success. You want to understand true power? Sarah's voice carried across the now silent store. Look around. Every shop owner you threatened, every system you tried to compromise, every business you targeted, they're all part of a community that chose to stand together. Your intimidation tactics didn't create fear, they created unity. Through the store's security mirrors, additional federal agents could be seen moving into position, their movements coordinated with practiced precision. The Shadow Riders' attempted show of force had been completely contained, their superior numbers rendered meaningless by months of careful planning and preparation. Tonight isn't just about arrests, Michael explained, his tactical positioning subtle but absolute. It's about demonstrating that small towns aren't isolated targets anymore. We're connected, coordinated, and capable of confronting sophisticated criminal enterprises with even more sophisticated law enforcement responses. The autumn evening had deepened outside Miller's Mall, the strategic lighting creating shadows that worked to law enforcement's advantage. Inside, the music store's warm atmosphere had been transformed into a tactical environment where every angle, every line of sight, had been calculated and controlled, turning the Shadow Riders' attempt at intimidation into the final chapter of their criminal enterprise. Federal agents are moving into position now, Michael announced, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him respect across 3 states. But before they do, I want you to understand something. The same community connections you tried to exploit. They're what brought you down. The same small-town values you thought made us vulnerable. They're what made this operation possible. And the same daughter you thought would be an easy target. She's been instrumental in dismantling your entire organization. In the world of law enforcement, Michael began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering a final lesson. We often talk about the thin blue line, but what happened here in Green Hills isn't just about that line. It's about the invisible web of community connections that makes true justice possible. A web that criminal enterprises like yours consistently fail to understand. The Shadow Riders' final moments of freedom played out under the watchful eyes of dozens of cameras, each recording device capturing evidence that would soon become part of a landmark federal prosecution. Through the store's windows, tactical teams continued their methodical processing of what would become one of the largest criminal enterprise busts in state history. You targeted small towns along Route 43, Sarah added, her voice steady and clear. Thinking they were vulnerable, isolated, easy marks for your protection rackets and cybercrimes. Instead, you found something you didn't expect. A network of communities working together, sharing information, preparing for exactly this moment. Every threat you made, every system you compromised, every business you tried to intimidate, they all became parts of a case that will reshape how we handle organized crime in small communities. Karen Chen's surveillance system displayed multiple feeds of the operation's final phases, each screen documenting another aspect of the Shadow Riders' complete containment. What had begun as an attempted intimidation had transformed into a textbook example of modern law enforcement coordination, a case study that would be taught in police academies across the country. Your technical expertise, Michael continued, addressing Wire one final time, it became your greatest weakness. Every system you compromised, every network you infiltrated, every piece of data you stole. They all led back to this moment. The evidence trail you've left spans 6 states, 15 cities, and dozens of businesses that have been waiting for justice. But more importantly, it's created a template for how small towns can work together to combat sophisticated criminal enterprises. The autumn evening had settled completely over Miller's Mall, the strategic lighting creating an environment where law enforcement maintained complete tactical advantage. Inside the music store, the warm atmosphere that had witnessed countless happy memories now bore witness to the dismantling of a sophisticated criminal organization. "Green Hills stands as a warning," Sarah declared, her confidence reflecting years of watching her father protect their community. "To every criminal enterprise that thinks small towns are easy targets, we might not have skyscrapers or bright lights, but we have something more valuable, a community that watches out for its own, that prepares, that stands together against threats like you. Every business owner you threatened, every system you tried to compromise, every person you tried to intimidate, they're all part of the reason you failed." James Parker's radio transmitted its final series of confirmations as the last elements of the Shadow Riders' support network were secured. The tactical teams moved with practiced precision, their coordinated efforts reflecting months of preparation and joint training that would now serve as a model for similar operations across the country. "You know what's truly remarkable about small-town law enforcement?" Michael asked, his voice carrying just a hint of professional satisfaction. "We understand patience. We know how to wait, how to watch, how to build a case that doesn't just stop a criminal operation, but dismantles it completely. Tonight isn't just an arrest. It's the beginning of a new chapter in how small communities protect themselves against organized crime." Through the store's security mirrors, the final phases of the operation unfolded with practiced precision. Federal agents moved methodically through the mall, securing evidence that would connect the Shadow Riders to criminal activities across multiple states. Each piece of evidence, from cell phones to surveillance footage, was being cataloged with a precision that reflected the operation's larger significance. "This operation," Michael continued, as the last of the arrests were processed, "will become a template for law enforcement agencies across the country, a demonstration of what's possible when communities work together, when law enforcement adapts to modern threats, when we refuse to be intimidated by those who threaten what we've built here in Green Hills. Every piece of evidence we've gathered, every connection we've documented, every pattern we've identified, they'll all help other communities stand up to organizations like yours." The mall's sophisticated surveillance system continued its silent documentation as Cypher and his lieutenants faced the reality of their situation. The cameras, disguised within architectural features and store fixtures, had recorded every moment of their failed attempt at intimidation, creating an irrefutable record for prosecution that would serve as evidence in cases across multiple jurisdictions. "The thing about small towns," Sarah added, her voice carrying the pride of someone who truly understood community values, "is that we don't just protect our own. We learn, we adapt, and we share what we've learned with others. Every tactic you used, every strategy you employed, every piece of technology you relied on, they're all now part of a playbook that will help other communities stand up to organizations like yours." Karen Chen's computer system continued displaying multiple feeds of the operation's conclusion, each screen telling part of a story that would soon become a case study in modern law enforcement. The sophisticated surveillance network that had seemed like overkill for a small-town mall had proven instrumental in documenting a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states. "Tonight's operation," Michael explained, his voice carrying the weight of years of law enforcement experience, "isn't just about stopping your organization. It's about changing the way criminal enterprises view small towns. It's about demonstrating that sophisticated criminal operations can be defeated not just by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by communities that refuse to be intimidated, that choose to stand together, that understand the power of patience and preparation." The autumn evening had transformed Miller's Mall from a simple shopping center into a symbol of community resistance against organized crime. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead become their undoing, their sophisticated criminal enterprise completely outmaneuvered by the very small-town law enforcement they had fatally underestimated. In the end, Michael concluded, addressing both the arrested criminals and the gathering of law enforcement officials, your organization's greatest mistake wasn't targeting Green Hills. It wasn't underestimating our capabilities or misreading our resolve. Your greatest mistake was failing to understand that true strength doesn't come from intimidation or technical sophistication. It comes from communities working together, from people choosing to stand up for what's right, from the invisible bonds that connect small towns across this country. Those bonds have always been there, but thanks to you, they're now stronger than ever, part of a network that will continue to protect communities long after your organization is nothing more than a cautionary tale in law enforcement textbooks. The evening's events had not just dismantled a criminal enterprise, they had created a template for community resistance against organized crime, a model that would be studied and replicated in small towns across the country. The Shadow Riders' attempt to establish dominance had instead become a testament to the power of community, preparation, and the enduring strength of small-town values in the face of modern criminal threats.